The water had just started to bubble when the first shell screamed overhead. Sergeant Thomas Marsh dropped his tin cup into the mud and threw himself toward the open hatch of his Cromwell tank. Behind him, the hedgerow exploded in a wall of fire and shrapnel. He heard screaming, not words, just raw human sound, and then the deep, thundering crack of a German 88mm gun finding its mark point. 3 weeks since D-Day. 3 weeks of pushing through Normandy's endless fields and sunken lanes. 3 weeks of watching friends burn inside their tanks while the German panzers picked them apart from positions they never saw coming. And now, on this grey morning near the town of Villers-Bocage, the 7th Armoured Division had walked straight into hell. Tommy hauled himself through the commander's hatch and dropped into his seat. His crew was already moving, Corporal James McAllister in the driver's position, hands steady on the controls despite the chaos outside. Corporal Eddie Shaw scrambling to load a round into the breech. Private Henry Sloan traversing the turret, searching for a target through the gunner's scope. And young Billy Oakes, just 19 years old, feeding ammunition from the storage racks with shaking hands. They had named their tank Lady Grey. A joke, at first. Eddie's idea. But after 2 years of fighting together, from the burning sands of North Africa to the beaches of Normandy, the name had become something more. A promise. A prayer. Contact front. Henry shouted. Tiger, 300 yards. Tommy felt his stomach drop. The Tiger I was the most feared tank in the German arsenal. 56 tons of sloped armor and a gun that could punch through a Cromwell like paper. The British tanks were faster, more agile, but in a straight fight, speed meant nothing against that kind of firepower. Mac, reverse. Get us behind the farmhouse. The Cromwell lurched backward as McAllister threw the tank into gear. Outside, Tommy could see the rest of his squadron dying. Lieutenant Morrison's tank took a direct hit to the turret, the whole top blew off like a bottle cap, flames pouring from the open wound. Sergeant Cole's crew tried to bail out, but machine gun fire cut them down before they reached the ground. They had been making tea. All of them. Dismounted, gathered around their little fires, enjoying 5 minutes of peace in a war that offered none. The Germans had watched. Waited. And then struck with perfect, merciless precision, the farmhouse wall exploded as Lady Grey crashed through it. Stone and timber rained down on the hull. Tommy lost sight of the Tiger in the dust and smoke, but he knew it was still out there, hunting. Billy, status on ammunition. No answer. Tommy looked down and saw Billy slumped against the hull, blood spreading across his uniform. A piece of shrapnel, stone or metal, impossible to tell, had punched through the gap in the hatch and caught him in the thigh. The wound was ugly, deep, pumping red with every heartbeat. Eddie, get pressure on that. Mac, don't stop moving. The Cromwell burst through the far side of the farmhouse and into an orchard. Apple trees whipped past the vision blocks. Somewhere behind them, another British tank brewed up, the term they used when a tank caught fire. Brewed up. Like making tea. The cruelty of the language had never struck Tommy before this moment. They ran for 20 minutes. Through orchards and fields, down lanes so narrow the hedgerows scraped paint from Lady Grey's flanks. When they finally stopped, hidden in a barn at the edge of a village Tommy didn't know the name of, the silence was worse than the gunfire. Eddie had Billy's leg wrapped tight with a bandage torn from his own shirt. The bleeding had slowed, but the boy's face was gray, his breathing shallow. He needed a surgeon. He needed a hospital. He needed to be anywhere but inside this metal coffin. Tommy climbed out of the hatch and stood on the turret. In the distance, black smoke rose from a dozen points along the horizon. The squadron was gone. Scattered or destroyed. The German ambush had been perfect, a single Tiger tank commanded by a panzer ace, catching an entire British column with their guards down, all because they had stopped to make tea. Tommy looked at the small fire pit they had left behind that morning. The scattered cups. The kettle lying on its side in the mud. Such a small thing. Such a human thing. And it had cost them everything that he made a decision then, standing on that turret with the smell of burning tanks in his nostrils. His crew would never leave Lady Grey again. Not for food. Not for rest. Not for tea. They would live inside their tank, eat inside their tank, fight and die inside their tank if they had to. The war had taken enough. It would not take his crew. Below him, Billy groaned in pain. Eddie murmured something reassuring. Mac sat in the driver's seat, hands still gripping the controls, staring at nothing. The Battle of Villers-Bocage would go down as one of the worst British defeats in Normandy. A single German tank commander, Michael Wittmann, though Tommy would not learn the name until years later, had destroyed over a dozen tanks and armored vehicles in a matter of minutes, but Tommy Marsh did not care about history. He cared about the 4 men inside Lady Grey. And he would keep them alive, no matter what it cost. And no matter what it cost them all. The smell was the first thing Tommy noticed when he woke: sweat, oil, cordite, and something worse. Something rotting. That he opened his eyes to the green glow of the turret interior. Lady Grey sat hidden beneath camouflage netting in a French barn, engine cold, hatches sealed. Outside, artillery rumbled in the distance like an endless thunderstorm. The battle for Caen had begun, and the 7th Armored Division was pushing through the worst terrain in Normandy, the Bocage. The hedgerow country. Ancient earthen walls topped with dense vegetation, dividing the landscape into 1,000 tiny killing fields. Every gap was an ambush point. Every lane was a death trap. The Germans had fortified these hedgerows for years, and now British tanks were dying by the dozens trying to break through. Tommy had kept his promise. 2 weeks since Villers-Bocage, and his crew had not left Lady Grey once. They ate cold rations inside the hull. They slept in shifts, curled around ammunition racks and spare parts. They relieved themselves into empty shell casings and tossed them out through the pistol ports when no one was looking. It was keeping them alive. But it was also killing them. Billy's wound had turned septic. The field dressing Eddie had applied was crusted with dried blood and pus, and the boy drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering names Tommy did not recognize. He needed antibiotics. He needed surgery. Every hour they delayed pushed him closer to death, but Tommy could not stop. Every time they halted, every time they opened a hatch, he saw Morrison's turret blowing off. He saw Cole's crew cut down by machine guns. He heard the bubbling water and smelled the tea leaves and knew with absolute certainty, that stopping meant dying. Mac had not spoken in 3 days. The driver sat at his controls like a statue, responding to orders with mechanical precision but offering nothing else. Tommy had seen it before, in Africa. The 1,000-yard stare. The mind retreating somewhere the war could not follow. Henry was worse. The gunner had started seeing things, movement in the hedgerows that was not there, German soldiers that turned out to be shadows. Twice he had nearly fired on British infantry. Twice Tommy had grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back from the trigger. Only Eddie remained himself. And Eddie was angry. "He's going to die, Tommy." Eddie's voice was low, meant only for the 2 of them, but in the confined space of the turret, everyone heard. "Billy's going to die, and you're going to let it happen because you're too scared to open a hatch." Tommy said nothing. There was nothing to say. We survived Africa together. We survived the beaches. We survived Villers-Bocage. And now you're going to kill us by keeping us locked in this tin can until we rot. I'm keeping us alive. No. Eddie leaned close, his face inches from Tommy's. You're keeping us breathing. That's not the same thing. The argument ended when the radio crackled to life. New orders. The division was pushing toward Hill 112, a vital piece of high ground overlooking the road to Caen. Intelligence reported heavy German armor in the area. Panthers. Maybe tigers. Command wanted the 7th Armored to punch through and secure the flank. Tommy relayed the orders. Mac started the engine without a word. Lady Grey rolled out of the barn and into the hedgerow maze. The next 6 hours were a nightmare. German anti-tank guns hidden in the bocage picked off tanks one by one. A Cromwell from another troop took a hit directly in front of them, Tommy watched the driver try to bail out, flames engulfing his uniform as he scrambled through the hatch. He made it 3 steps before collapsing. Lady Grey pushed on. Henry fired at shadows. Mac drove like a machine. Eddie loaded rounds and cursed under his breath. And Billy lay in the hull floor, burning with fever, his breath coming in ragged gasps. By nightfall, they had advanced less than 2 miles. The division had lost 14 tanks. Hill 112 remained in German hands. And Billy had stopped responding entirely. Tommy made the call at midnight. They would halt at a crossroads near a field hospital. They would dismount. They would carry Billy out and get him the help he needed. It was a death sentence. He knew it. Every instinct screamed at him to stay inside, stay sealed, stay safe, but Eddie was right. Breathing was not living. And if Billy died because Tommy was too afraid to open a hatch, then what was the point of surviving at all? Mac, stop here. Eddie, help me with Billy. Henry, keep watch. The hatches opened. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the smell of grass and distant smoke. Tommy climbed out, his legs cramping after so long in the confined space. He reached down and lifted Billy's shoulders while Eddie took his legs. They carried him across the field toward the lights of the hospital tent. British medics ran to meet them. Stretchers appeared. Voices shouted orders. Billy was still alive when they handed him over. Barely. But alive. Tommy stood in the darkness, watching the medics work, and felt something crack inside his chest. Not relief. Not hope. Just exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning that he had broken his promise. And Billy might still die anyway, but at least he had tried. At least he had remembered what it meant to be human. Behind him, Lady Grey sat with her hatches open, vulnerable for the first time in weeks. Tommy did not close them. Not yet. The crew needed air. They needed space. They needed to remember that the world outside the tank was still worth fighting for, even if that world might kill them. The depot smelled of grease and hot metal, and somewhere beneath it all, the faint ghost of tea leaves. Tommy stood in the repair bay, watching mechanics swarm over Lady Grey like surgeons around a patient. The Cromwell had taken a beating in the bocage, track links shattered, road wheels cracked, armor scorched by near misses that had come within inches of killing them all. She needed 3 days of work before she could fight again. 3 days. It felt like a lifetime. Billy was alive. The field surgeons had saved his leg, though he would never walk without a limp. They had evacuated him to England 2 days ago, along with hundreds of other wounded men. Tommy had not been allowed to see him before he left. The crew of Lady Grey was down to 4 now. Mac, Eddie, Henry, and Tommy himself. They had been assigned replacement bunks in a tent near the depot while their tank was repaired. Clean sheets. Hot food. Showers for the first time in a month. Tommy could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw burning tanks. On the second day, a captain from the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers found him sitting alone near the repair bay, staring at nothing. The officer introduced himself as Arthur Whitmore, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, more professor than soldier. Sergeant Marsh, Whitmore said. I've been reviewing casualty reports from your division. Fascinating patterns. Tommy did not respond. He was not in the mood for conversation. Whitmore sat down beside him anyway. Do you know how many tank crews we've lost to ambushes during dismounted rest periods? Nearly 30% of total casualties in some sectors. Men caught outside their vehicles, making tea, stretching their legs. The Germans know our habits. They wait for them. I know. Tommy's voice was flat. I was at Villers-Bocage. Ah. Then you understand the problem. Whitmore pulled a folded paper from his pocket, a technical diagram covered in measurements and annotations. What if I told you there was a solution? A way to keep crews inside their tanks without sacrificing their morale? Tommy looked at the diagram. It showed a small metal cylinder connected to the tank's electrical system, with a heating element at the base and a spout at the top. Simple. Almost absurdly simple. A kettle, Tommy said. You want to put a kettle inside a tank. A boiling vessel, Whitmore corrected. BV for short. It connects to the tank's power supply, heats water to boiling in under 10 minutes. Crews can brew tea, make soup, warm their rations, all without ever opening a hatch. Tommy stared at the diagram for a long moment. He thought about Billy's fevered face. About Mac's empty eyes. About Henry seeing ghosts in the hedgerows. About the way his own hands had started shaking whenever they stopped moving. Tea won't win the war, he said finally. No, Whitmore agreed. But it might keep the men fighting it alive long enough to see the end. The human mind is a fragile thing, Sergeant. It needs routine. Comfort. Small rituals that remind us we're still civilized, even in the midst of barbarism. Deny a man those things for long enough, and he stops being a soldier. He becomes a machine. And machines break. Tommy thought about the past month. The cold rations. The shell casings. The sealed hatches and the suffocating darkness. He had tried to turn his crew into machines. He had almost succeeded. How many do you have? He asked. Whitmore smiled. 3 prototypes. I was hoping the 7th Armored might be willing to test them in the field. Lady Grey received her boiling vessel 2 days later. The mechanics installed it in the turret floor, running cables to the auxiliary power system. It was ugly, awkward, and took up space they did not have to spare. Eddie laughed when he saw it. Fighting the Reich with Earl Grey. Bloody brilliant. Mac said nothing, but Tommy caught him looking at the device with something that might have been curiosity. Henry was afraid of it. What if it explodes? What if it sets off the ammunition? It won't, Tommy said. He did not know if that was true. He did not care. That night, they brewed their first cup inside the tank. Eddie handled the water, filling the BV from their canteen supply, watching the heating element glow red in the dim turret light. Mac insisted on making the tea properly, the way his mother had taught him. Milk first, then tea, never the other way around. They drank in silence, crowded together in the cramped space, knees touching knees, shoulders pressed against armor plate. The tea was too hot. The cups were dented. The taste was the same as it had always been, but something was different. Henry stopped looking at the shadows. Mac spoke for the first time in days, just a few words, a quiet joke about the weather. Eddie leaned back against the turret ring and closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the anger was gone. Tommy held his cup between both hands, feeling the warmth seep into his palms. He understood now what Whitmore had meant. The tea was not about the tea. It was about the pause. The breath. The reminder that they were still men, not machines. The war would continue. The killing would continue. But inside Lady Grey, for just a few minutes, they could pretend they were somewhere else. Someone else, and that, Tommy realized, was worth more than any weapon. The road to Falaise was paved with the dead. Lady Grey rolled through the wreckage of the German retreat, burned trucks, abandoned artillery pieces, bodies in field grey lying where they had fallen. The August sun beat down without mercy, and the smell of death hung over everything like a fog. Flies swarmed in black clouds. Crows circled overhead, waiting their turn. The Falaise pocket. The largest encirclement of German forces since Stalingrad. 200,000 Wehrmacht soldiers trapped between the British, American, Canadian, and Polish armies, fighting desperately to escape before the jaws closed completely. Tommy's orders were simple: close the gap. Stop the Germans from breaking out. Hold the line until the pocket collapsed. For 3 days, they fought without rest. German rearguard units threw everything at the advancing Allies, Panther tanks appearing from hidden positions, infantry with Panzerfausts lurking in ditches, artillery barrages that turned the roads into craters. The 7th Armored took casualties by the hour. Tanks brewed up. Crews burned. The advance continued. Inside Lady Grey, the boiling vessel worked constantly. They had developed a ritual now. Every 4 hours, no matter what was happening outside, they brewed. Mac made the tea, always Mac, always the same way, milk first. Eddie passed the cups. Henry kept watch through the gunner's scope. Tommy drank last, after everyone else had finished. That it took 5 minutes. Sometimes less, if the fighting was heavy. But those 5 minutes held them together. Other crews had noticed. Word spread through the division about the strange device in Lady Grey's turret. Some commanders dismissed it as foolishness, a distraction, a waste of precious space and power. But others saw the difference in Tommy's crew. The steadiness. The sharpness. The way they kept fighting when other crews broke. By the second day, 3 more tanks had requested boiling vessels. By the third, the requests numbered in the dozens. Whitmore's prototypes were being replicated by mechanics throughout the division, cobbled together from spare parts and ingenuity. The Kettle War, they called it. A joke at first. But the men who used the BV stopped laughing. They understood. On the final morning, Lady Grey encountered a Tiger. The German tank sat in the middle of the road, blocking the only route to the village where the Pocket's last defenders were making their stand. It was damaged, track blown off, hull scarred by multiple hits, but its turret still traversed, and its 88mm gun was still very much alive. Tommy assessed the situation through his periscope. The Tiger could not move, but it did not need to. Any tank that tried to pass would be destroyed. And there was no time to wait for infantry support or call in an airstrike. The Pocket had to close today. Ideas? He asked. Eddie loaded around. We could try flanking through the orchard. Too dense. We'd get stuck. Mac gripped the control sticks. I could try to rush past. Use our speed. He'd hit us before we made it 50 yards. Henry peered through his scope. The gun's traversing left. He hasn't seen us yet. Tommy made the decision. We engage. Eddie, armor piercing. Henry, aim for the turret ring, that's where the armor's weakest. Mac, on my signal, full speed forward. We close the distance before he can get a shot off. Silence in the turret. They all knew what this meant. A straight charge against a Tiger. The odds were not good. One more brew first. Eddie's voice was light, but his hands were steady on the ammunition rack. Tommy almost laughed. Make it quick. The boiling vessel hummed. Water heated. Mac prepared the tea with the same careful attention he always showed, as if they were not about to die. They drank standing at their stations, cups in one hand, controls in the other. Ready? Tommy asked. 3 voices answered as one. Ready. Mac. Go. Lady Grey surged forward. The Cromwell's engine roared as Mac pushed it to maximum speed. Tommy watched through the periscope as the Tiger's turret swung toward them, the long barrel of the 88 tracking their movement. Henry, fire. The Cromwell's gun barked. The round struck the Tiger's turret ring, showering sparks. Not a kill, but the German crew flinched, just for a second, just long enough. Again. Another shot. This one hit lower, gouging armor but failing to penetrate. The Tiger fired, the shell screamed past Lady Grey's turret, missing by inches. Mac swerved left, then right, throwing off the German gunner's aim. 50 yards now. 40. Final round, penetrating. Eddie slammed the shell home. Henry fired. The round struck the Tiger's turret ring dead center. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, then the German tank exploded, the blast threw Lady Grey sideways. Tommy felt the hull shudder as debris rained down on the armor. Smoke filled the turret. Alarms screamed. Report. Tommy shouted. Hull intact, Mac said. Guns clear, Eddie confirmed. I can still see, Henry added. They had won. Against all odds, against everything the war had thrown at them, they had won. Tommy opened the commander's hatch and climbed out onto the turret. The Tiger burned in front of them, flames pouring from every opening. Beyond it, the road to Falaise lay open, the pocket would close. The war would continue, Belgium, Holland, Germany itself still waited. But this battle was over. Eddie climbed up beside him. In his hand, he held a dented tin cup, blackened by smoke but still intact. "Fancy a brew, Sergeant?" Tommy looked at the burning Tiger. At the road ahead. At the crew of Lady Grey, his crew, his brothers, his family. He took the cup. "Yeah," he said. "I think I would." The kettle was already heating.